people like Malcolm X, I think his story, may Allah have mercy on his soul, which a lot of people don't really talk about, which for me was very inspiring. How he developed sexual discipline and the sexual ethics of Malcolm X. And I might do like some videos on that. But people forget before Malcolm X or Al Hajj Malik Shabazz rahimullah, before he became this phenomenal orator, speaker, sexually disciplined man, he was someone that was promiscuous. He was someone that was in the streets, right? People forget that. And then he, obviously, when he was incarcerated for a number of years, and obviously even after coming, because obviously when you're in prison, obviously you're not going to be sexually active with women, I'm assuming. But even after coming out of prison, when he joined the Nation of Islam, he spoke about how he would remain celibate, despite having offers from women for marriage and things like that. But he was dedicated to spreading that message at that time. But he spoke about him refraining from women and being sexually disciplined because he had a greater purpose as he saw it. And then even after being married, he had issues as well. But my point is, this is someone, and why I respect him highly, may Allah have mercy on his soul, is then even when he found out about his leader at the time of his sexual indiscretions and taking advantage of women, his sexual ethics spoke to him that this is not right, and he spoke out against that. But the story of the sexual ethics of Malcolm X and the man being sexually disciplined and his evolution, that's not really spoken about. It's not just this idea that he was one time criminal pimp, then he went to prison, then he found the Nation of Islam, then he just became a discipline. No, it's an evolution. And you read his, like I said, again, for him, maybe the period in being in prison, being incarcerated helped him and develop that self-restraint. But then also when you're coming out, it's a different it's a different test as well. And I think as men, we kind of forget that. We just think that okay, once I get married, then it's clear it's going to be fine. No, once you get married, there may be another test that you didn't even that you did, and it might be just as hard or even harder. And because you're married and because you have a wife, it might be even harder for you to talk about because when you're not married, it's easy to speak, Sheikh, I'm not married, or I need some counseling, I need some advice. Then when you're married, like I touched on earlier, it might be harder because people are less likely to empathize because they'll think you've got a wife, but then you might have some issues in the bedroom. That's why you're not being satisfied. So where do you go to there? And then obviously the sin of adultery is much more severe than the sin of fornication. So even more so, you're even more worried. But then where you're working, there may be temptation. So my point is that and just sorry, the last thing I'll say is even reading the Quran and the Hadith, if you read the stories, like I said, and the verses, it speaks about. Like for me, when I read verses that say lower your gaze and guard the private parts, that's often translated as Muslims should be modest, and I think you use the word modest and chastity. For me, those two words are archaic and it doesn't resonate because when I think of chastity, this is my it sounds, and I'm not saying this is correct. When I think about modesty, I generally think about it being a female virtue, when in reality it's a male virtue as well that men should develop to be modest and be chaste. When I think about modesty and chastity, I think about like a woman, and I think about a woman maybe like in the 18th, 17th century, and like you got the chastity belt, and it doesn't really connect. Whereas when I think about or use like terms like sexual discipline, it sounds like something that as a man I can aspire to. It's a quality that I want to possess. But being chaste, again, for me, it just sounds like I said, again, it might be because of the English language. That's why it doesn't really resonate when I hear those words like being modest and being chaste as a man, or it just sounds maybe being shy and demure. But when I think about sexually disciplined, it's like, no, someone who, yes, has sexual desires, but restrains it or has the ability to say no. Like the story of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam in the Quran. What was his story? Obviously, there was different tests he had, but the one of the biggest tests was that he desired the woman, she desired him, but out of fear of Allah, he didn't engage in act. And the Prophet mentions that that's going to be one of the people that is under the shade of Allah is a man who, a beautiful woman of status, wants to sleep with him, but he says no out of fear of Allah. So again, it's when you're reading those stories about, okay, this is a trait or characteristics I want to develop, then I think you can then look at sexual discipline as something that you want to embody in your life. And then another thing I'll just add is just having high standards. That's the last thing I have. If you've got high standards, that you're not just going to be wanting to sleep around with anything and everything, um, you're more likely to develop sexual. I said that's the last thing. The final thing is words by Ibn Abbas, who's obviously a great companion, a scholar. He said that when And it's like, so if you're speaking to people, said if you see a beautiful woman and you're enticed by her, again, that's not your wife. Just think about her bad qualities, or think about her faults. As in, obviously, when you're enticed by someone, she looks like the best thing ever, and you see all of the beauty, but she's still a human being. If you think about not publicly, not to abuse her, or not to, but I'm saying if you think about like either the negative consequences or she's not as desirable as my mind or Shaitan making out to be, then she'll you won't really put her in a pedestal because that's an approach I think is a good approach rather than you can say the approach that a number of men have is they have sex with a woman and then they develop or they have what is it called post-nut clarity. Then they realize actually I didn't really like her. Why did I do that? Now again, that's a non-Muslim way or non-Islamic way, shall I say, because Muslims still engage in casual sex. Not saying that we should, but that's one way that men realize actually after I slept with her, I realized I didn't really like her. Now at that time it's too late because you've committed a sin and there could potential consequence of unwanted pregnancy, STIs, X, Y, and Z. But I like Ibn Abbas's advice where he said that if you see a woman that you're aroused by, you think she's the best thing ever, just think about her bad qualities, kind of thing. Like she's not as perfect as you've made her out to be, or Shaitan's made her out to be, and Allah knows best. I think I went on a bit too much there. Sorry.
No, it's absolutely appreciated.